Kenny Morris.
Thank you.
Where have you been the last 30 years?
Ducking and diving.
And I don't think you've ever been to a punk festival. Well, not since 77, 76. So
I haven't, no.
And I was seeing you yesterday in the book room, and you were quite impressed by what's going on around here. After all these years, something you, probably with about another 20 people started, is still here.
Yeah, that I'm really pleased about. I'm proud about you as well. But like what amazed me in the week since I've been here, really amazed me was like how something like this rebellion doesn't happen anywhere in the world, where you get something like 16,000 people from all over the place coming to one particular spot. And you know, when I was looking at them all, and I was thinking, gosh, you know, they put so much time into how they look with their fabulous hair, and they've constructed these outfits. I wouldn't even say, you know, that's the best word I can use. So they were like walking works of art, literally. So I was like, wow.
Would you feel any connection with that from, like, say, it is nearly 50 years ago now, isn't it? And when you were a walking work of art in 1976, did you have any idea that all this time later, this thing would still be going on?
No, not at all. And what's lovely as well, like everyone in Blackpool seems to be so kind, and amongst all the people who I've been seeing at this venue throughout the week, they all get on so well together. No animosity, no one kicking off. Everyone just being so nice and helpful, and that was something I thought only hippies was good at.
I mean, was it quite different in 1976? Was it as friendly then, or was it a bit more rivalry in those times?
Loads of rivalry between groups. There weren't many in 76, 77, and I guess in 77 you really had to watch your back. If you looked anything near vaguely like a punk, you just have to worry about Joe Public. You didn't have to worry about some other kind of group of could be, you know, Teddy Boys, or because we used to get a lot of bother from them, unfortunately. But it was more because of when this show came out, Bill Grundy, and it was live. It was like 6 p.m. on the telly. I was at home watching it with my dad, and Bill Grundy incited the Sex Pistols and made obvious passes towards Siouxsie Sue, and it was just horrific. And there was a bloke up our road, just up our road. He was a lorry driver, and his kids were watching it as well. And he was so incensed that he put his boot through the TV screen.
Oh, wait a minute. So that bloke actually existed? I thought that was made up. And that was on your road?
Yeah. So, but because of that Bill Grundy show, as I was kind of trying to explain, you had to worry. You didn't know who was around the corner. Everyone, young people in groups, were going around with just one thing in mind, and that was like to maim on sight. So you had to worry about everyone, you know.
Seriously. Did that feed into the music? Did that make the music more intense,
naturally,
claustrophobic?
Yes, oh yes, yeah. Oh yes. So that whole period, 77, was I think 77 couldn't have been a more intense time in the punk period of time. Some people say, well, it's 76 to whatever, 78, 79. It's debatable. It's my opinion that punk only lasted for 77. It all took place in 1977. 77 was the place to be. In London was the place to be in 77. Not in America or anywhere else. That was the best place, because that's where everything was happening. Bands and people were coming over in swarms from America and to London because they heard about what was going on. But by the end of 77, going into 78, it wasn't really any longer the place to be, quite honestly.
I mean, I mean, that's the spark, wasn't it?
Hmm?
I mean, but you weren't initially a musician, were you? You were initially at art college.
I was, yeah.
And you were trying to do a career in art.
Yeah.
So how did it start for you to actually become a musician?
Well, I'd played drums once a weekend in a little band at school, and then what happened next? Went to art college, and when I started to go to art college, by the time I got to Camberwell School of Art to do this degree course in fine art graphics, I was already thinking I had my goals, my eyes, and my mindset on going to the Royal College of Art. That's what I was thinking. But of course, everything changed, and I was introduced to Sid Vicious, got into with the Flowers of Romance, started doing film sets with John Maybury for Derek Jarman's Jubilee, and while I was at Camberwell and this was going on, I was thinking, okay, but when I'd finished the first year, I got a first grade, which entitled me to, if I wanted to, take time off to study a particular thing of interest. So I was really keen to go to New York, check out places like the Andy Warhol factory and other things I had in mind that I'd only read about, Max's Kansas City, CBGB's, all these kind of places. But that all went by the by, because London was the place to be, and I was already hooked. I think I was hooked from the first time I ever saw the Sex Pistols in 1976 at the Nashville. And it was the first time also I saw Sid Vicious.
Well, what was it about the Pistols at that gig, and also about Sid, that was so captivating?
Well, to me, when I saw them at the 100 Club Punk Rock Festival, for instance, I immediately was thinking Johnny Rotten has to be the most engaging, amazing front figure of any band on the planet, but the world just didn't know it yet.
And Sid as well was. Did you meet him that night then, Sid? Did you meet Sid that night at the Nashville?
I didn't, but
Okay.
I was watching him.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And
I couldn't take my eyes off him. I'd never seen anything like him in my life. I mean, the Pistols were only on the stage for about 3 minutes, and then this fight took place in the front 2 rows, which I'm pretty certain was instigated by McLaren. But Sid was on the side, leaning against the PA in a gold lame Let It Rock jacket, and he was just he just made one little attack at somebody in the audience with his belt, put it back on, and as if nothing had happened, and did this usual sort of grin that he used to have. And then so when I started to do the 100 Club, I started to see every single Sex Pistols gig that took place, and Sid was, of course, their best friend of Johnny's, and the best follower of the band, and of course he invented pogoing, which became the norm throughout punkdom in no time. And I kind of thought, well, I really have to get to know this guy. I just have to. And I thought the best way to get acquainted with that by doing that is just get pogoing right beside him, shoulder to shoulder. So I used to do that for ages, and never said a word to him until he got on stage with the Banshees and Marco Perroni and Steve Severin at the 100 Club at the Punk Festival for that one-off performance. Then I picked up the courage. He walked off stage, and I just goes up to him and says, because I noticed like he played the drums, he kept them real simple, and the cymbals real sparse. And so when he came off, and he'd never played before, and he came off, and I said to him, my name's Kenny. I just want to say, Maureen Tucker's one of my favourite drummers of all time, and what you just did is really quite similar. And he got real shy, real humble, and was really nice and sort of, but really humbled by my compliment. And thanks very much. And then he says, but however, I'll have to tell you, that was a one-off for me. I have no place behind a drum kit. That's not for me. I have other plans. And that was that. Little did I know that in a short while, I'd be in his band. He'd be singing, playing bass. I was in that band for about 6 months.
What was that 6 months like? They're one of the great mystery footnotes of punk.
No,
I mean, was there a lot of songs? What were the rehearsals
he
like?
wrote about 5 songs, really witty, funny, clever, intelligent stuff. But he learned to play bass by listening to the Ramones. and so he could play anything they could play off, but you know.
So he was quite musical.
He was.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't think that or even know that. But then things happened. Of course, they changed, and when he joined the Pistols, the Flowers was over, and 6 months later, I joined the Banshees. That was that.
I mean, when you were playing with Flowers Romance, did you start getting your drum style worked out? You have a very distinctive, game-changing drum style, I think. You know,
no, that's something that's just evolved over time with the Banshees from constantly touring. No, I mean, I only in the short time I was with the Flowers, we only had a few rehearsals in the by the Roundhouse with the Clash's rehearsal rooms there, and only a few. And we never performed, never played anywhere, no recordings of it, and nothing. So when I started to, when I joined the Banshees, in the early days before we signed, it was just we did rehearse at times a fair bit while we could, and then we'd be touring all the time. And as time went on, we weren't rehearsing, particularly when we got to sign. We weren't actually. It seemed that we were writing all our songs in sound checks, literally. That's where most of our songs came from. I think once we'd signed, I don't really remember us rehearsing that much at all.
I mean,
the drum sound, every member in the group perfected, got better and better. Like when Steve Severin, when he started off that night at the 100 Club, he only picked up a bass guitar a week beforehand. He didn't know how to play. So, and and that was Siouxsie's first time on stage as well, and in my case with the drums, it was just that constant touring right through 78 to 79, or from late 77. No, 78, 79 really. That I evolved this drum sound that was my own. I didn't know technically anything about drums. It just came between the four of us, and it worked. It just worked, and I just got more proficient, Yeah.
Was it a conscious decision not to play the drums in a straight fours?
I would no interest to me at all.
So you're applying like an art school idea to playing drums, playing them in a different way, like a different sort of palette.
I mean, I just started to, my drum sound started to fit in with Siouxsie's very staccato voice that she used to use at the time. So I kind of blended, or if you like, made my drums fit in beats and everything with her staccato, the way she used to sing at the time.
But I'm sure
you get me.
I'm sure this is not true, and this is one of those things that sticks in interviews over the years. But Siouxsie always said that they took your cymbals away to stop you playing like a rock drummer.
No.
But I don't think that's true
no,
at all.
I did. That was
that made more sense.
It was the first day the first time I ever rehearsed with them, and we had they had a gig coming up in 2 weeks. The group only had 4 songs. I walked in, manager nearly went crazy because I didn't know how to set up this kit that I was given, and but the one thing I did do once he got furious. When I set the kit up, I removed the cymbals, not she. That's a petty little detail, but that's the fact.
It's an important detail.
Yeah. So I got to use, I always wanted to use the cymbals really sparingly, and I had one particular cymbal. So I'd have a hi-hat, and I had a crash. Didn't want to ride, but I used to use this Chinese cymbal, like an upside-down one. So when you hit it, it'd go. And I used to love that.
Yeah. Oh yes.
And also, I'd use the side drum instead of the hi-hat. Which is going.
Which is definitely your signature. Yeah, the toms, which became
the toms
copied endlessly by loads of other drummers.
Yeah. Well, the other thing as well, I used to instead of using the bass drum like this, I used to put my leg right up and go like that. With the result was, after a couple of years of doing that, I couldn't walk in a straight line because this leg got really big. No kidding. And this one was like a shrimp, and I was like, Which way am I going?
And you also brought John into the band as well, didn't you? Did you bring John?
I did, yeah. And that was it.
So you knew him before then, yeah?
I did, yeah. I went to, John Maybe actually had mentioned to him, because I was at the same art school in St Albans. And so I rang him. I went to see his show. He wasn't there. He didn't know I'd been to the show. But what I saw of what he did, I was impressed, and I thought, yes. But I'd never heard him play. And so I rang him up, and at his mum's house in Hempstead. And I said, oh, we met Jolly once anyway at a party. And he said, yeah. I said, well, just wondering, would you be interested in... Because when I interviewed him in '98, it's so clear from what you said, he had this interest in architecture, equating what you see on the stem of the guitar and the frets and everything with architecture. Very knowledgeable about all of that. And so anyhow, I hadn't heard him play. So I said, oh yeah, well, would you be interested? And I didn't tell him that we weren't auditioning other guitarists. I didn't want to think he had it in the bag, I thought, you've got to earn this. So I said, would you be interested in coming down to Putney, doing a bit of a rehearsal to audition for the Banshees? And then there was this big silence. It went on for like, what seemed hours. It was for ages. I heard this big crash, and then a silence. And then he came back. I said, what was that? He said, I was so shocked I fell off the fucking stool. See you in a week, see you in 2 days' time or something. And that was that. So he came down, rest is history. Beautiful. Yeah.
And you must have been aware very early on there's something quite special about this lineup. It's one of those perfect lineups that somehow just coalesces, isn't it?
He couldn't have been the better person, John Mackay. He just, what could I say?
An amazing guitar player. Yeah. And again, nobody sounded like him before, a game changer.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those early rehearsals and those early gigs, where you got the four of you, and as it's starting to get towards the sound, that must have been very exciting.
Yes. Yeah, with John on board.
Yeah.
I mean, the other guy, P.T. Fenton, the guitarist we had before him, don't get me wrong, he was a brilliant rock guitarist, but he just didn't fit in personality-wise or something. And I know it sounds real shitty, but it's going to sound really ridiculous. He just didn't look right either. He didn't smell right. He didn't look right. He didn't have the same sense of humour. Not that we had much.
You definitely had a look, though. The band looked like a band as well, didn't it?
Yes.
It's not just Siouxsie, who's obviously iconic, but the whole band looked great.
Yes, perfect in every way.
And was that something you were aware of, or was that just something that evolved as well?
No, I guess we would have been very aware of that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So when you went in to record the album with Steve Lillywhite, did you have a very good sense of what you were doing?
The Scream was an absolute joy to do. Everyone was happy, and working with Steve Lillywhite, who was about our age, he was a genius, and we already could tell that this guy's going to go on to be one of the best producers in the world, and sure he has. So everything was hunky-dory with the Scream, perfect. Everything went wrong, as you might imagine. Even though the second album, Join Hands, got to number 12 in the charts, the Scream had got to number 10, so there was only 2 between them, but the hostility between us was so bad, and the disagreements over the Join Hands album sleeve, and the rows and everything over all of that muck. And then our manager got in a completely different producer, no longer Steve Lillywhite. John and I go, hang on, why try and fix something that doesn't need fucking fixing? We want Steve. Completely ignored. By this time, John and I were never listened to. There was no, what's the word?
Communication?
Yeah, there's another thing.
Dynamic?
Begins with C.
There's a lot of words begin with C.
There was no... Huh? No.
Camaraderie.
Well, it was all of these things, all these words. But, no.
It's like a little competition.
Hang on. You know when things aren't equal? What's that? Democratic begins with D.
D, yeah.
Dunce. Dunce. Thank you, lady.
Chemodratic.
Mate. Thank you. Yeah, so everything went seriously wrong, and we weren't even talking to each other when we made that album. Believe it or not, not a word was being spoken to between us. It was that bad, and in the very last day of making that album, to our absolute horror, they had the cheek to actually lock John and I out of the studio for the final fucking mix. You got to be kidding. So with all this going on, we had work to do. We had to go on tour. We had interviews to do. And all the time we're doing these interviews, we're having to try and hide all this shit from the journalists who are interviewing us. And then it just got worse. It got better and got worse and worse. When we went on the Join Hands tour, for instance, we found out. Well, we actually didn't find out until the day John and I left, when we read about it in Sounds, and it turns out they turned it in Sounds, and one of them said, "Oh yeah, we weren't even going to allow them to do any interviews on the tour." Wait, and what else weren't we allowed to do? Take a shit. I actually don't. There were so many things they said they weren't. And I said, and the guy who interviewed them said, "Oh, did you ask them about this?" He said, "Is there any democracy going on here? I mean, how do you make these? How do you make decisions so that it doesn't seem equal?" And the guy who answered was Steve said, "No, we didn't ask them. We told them," which was bollocks. We weren't told anything. We were told nothing about anything important when we were going on that tour.
Because you can hear it in the music, because the scream, the beauty of the scream, is that all the instruments are playing lead at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, so the drums are a lead instrument, so is the bass, so is guitar, so is the vocals. It's very democratic sounding.
You're right, yes.
Join Hands, which is actually a great record, probably a horrible record to make, but does sound great. It's very claustrophobic.
That's what John Savage said in his review of it. Exactly those words, claustrophobic. He was the one journalist who noticed that. But back to the music, though, that sound was lovely because it was all about, I think all between us was about space, leaving space for another instrument to breathe. So you let another instrument like the guitar take over. It also gave me, the drummer, a breather. It was all very coordinated in that sense, So I sometimes could stop, and it would cause it would add something very dramatic, sort of like hush, what's happened, and then all of a sudden come back in really fast and hard, So yes,
yeah. You're right there. I mean, it had a brilliant drama to it and brilliant dynamics
and suspense.
Yeah. And I guess that was all instinctive as well. It wasn't.
Yes.
It wasn't planned. You probably just felt, and that's how the music was written in the first place. When you're writing the songs, you just felt like stopping there, and it was just the right place to stop.
Yes, indeed, like on Switch and on Jigsaw. Jigsaw was one of my favourites.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, really.
I mean, do you ever listen to those two albums now, years later?
I do occasionally.
And what do you still have the same, do they evoke the same emotions, or do they sound so different, so distant, that you could think about them in different ways now?
No, they feel they sort of fill me up the same. I was thinking, wow, if I wasn't if it wasn't me, I'd be thinking, oh my God, yeah, that's not bad.
Not bad. Yeah, I mean, and then we get to the painful split in Aberdeen, isn't it? So it's building up. There's a lot of tension, and you go to the record shop to do the signing, and that's where it all just.
Well, the thing was, a lot of the press that followed pointed to the point of the split being because of an altercation within the group that took place in the record shop in Aberdeen prior to the evening's gig. Of course, it wasn't. The seeds of discontent was actually sown from the day we signed to Polydor, that far back, to be honest. Even though we had a luxurious kind of time making the Scream, the seeds were already at work.
In what way?
In quite a lot of ways, actually. I mean, one of the reasons after many years, I decided, it's about time I wrote about all of this and more. Is
because you're doing your book now, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was because I wanted, I knew John couldn't speak about it. And so I thought, well, I will, because I always knew I had a book in me, but since the age of 7. And but I thought, well, I got a pretty good feeling for some reason. I got a hunch that I know I don't want to write a fiction. I'm not interested in writing a fiction or a novel. And I got a pretty good idea that I'm going to lead a pretty interesting, eventful life, let's say. And maybe I'll write a factual account. I'll see. And I always knew I wanted to be in a band as well when I was 7 years old. But I was at school. I came first in a primary school poetry competition, and I didn't know what poetry was. I knew that I liked words that rhymed and it was in a context of a story, but that was as far as it goes. And I think that little thing, sort of that moment in time, that made me think, oh yeah, I'm going to write a book one day. I will, but in the senior years of my life. I'll leave it till then when I've lived a life. Yeah.
So that day in Aberdeen, then, you didn't really know you were going to leave the band, did you? It was just...
No, we did actually everything in our power possible to avoid leaving the band, but we also knew it was inevitable that by the end of the tour, because a lot of people thought that we actually had planned to leave, that we had going to do such a thing. Of course we hadn't. No way. So, so we thought, well, yes, it's going to happen that unfortunately we're going to have to leave at the end of the tour, only to find out when we read the interview in Sounds I was on about a week after we left the group, the members of the band were saying, oh, and that's another thing, we were going to kick them out at the end of the tour anyway.
So there was no going back from there?
No.
So even when you both got on the train from Aberdeen down to London, did you still think, maybe tomorrow we'll just carry on the tour? Or did you know at that point, this is probably over?
Oh, we knew. For sure. There was no going back. Not at all. That was that.
It was a bit, obviously, you bumped into Siouxsie a couple of times after that, and obviously at that point in time, it's still a bit raw, a bit tense, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was. I mean, I had one rough night there. It was at a Debbie Harry party in town in London, and I was invited to the party, and some people were saying, oh God, you can't go there, Siouxsie, everyone's going to be there, and all the record company people were there and everything. I said, no way, I'm not going to be holed up in my squat and not go down there. I'm going to go. So I went, and Siouxsie was at the bottom of the stairs, and looking up at me as if to say, just you dare. And I just thought, all right. And then, but our bodyguard, what used to be Mick Murphy, our driver bodyguard, was working at the top of the stairs, and he said, no, there'll be no trouble. Don't you worry about it. Go ahead. And I said, oh yeah, of course I'm going to go ahead. However, I did keep my coat on just in case. So I get to the bottom of the stairs. I sit down with my back to the people in the hall, and no one was on the dance floor or in the middle of the hall, and it's a big old church. And all of a sudden, Steve's whacked me in the face from behind, like a wet fish. And then the next thing I know, I'm right in the middle of the floor with about 10 people on me. And I've got my coat up around my head, and I'm kicking like fuck in every direction. And I didn't get scathed, thank God. But I did get taken out, lynched up the stairs. And I was absolutely furious because so much of the problems we had in the band, I always put the finger. For me and John, the finger really was. It was all our manager's fault on my life. Everything, it was him. He was it. But unfortunately, Steve and Siouxsie always sided with him because they'd known him for years. They'd known him since he worked with the Pistols in the early days. So, that was the score. So when I got to the top of the stairs, out comes the manager. I was waiting for the manager. The old bodyguard had my arms pinned behind my back because I said I'm going to do something here. And manager comes out, and I'm sorry, but I just kicked him really hard in the guts, and he fell to the floor screaming, ha ha. And then Billy Idol comes up with Steve Strange from downstairs and said, "Oh, God, that was disgusting what we saw them do to you. That was dreadful. Let's go off." "Where?" I said, "Look, we'll take you to the Who's party, Chelsea, some hotel in Chelsea." So that's what we did.
But we like a happy ending, and you actually met Siouxsie a few years later in Dublin.
Hatchet was buried.
And you had a little hug, and it was all nice,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
it was 1982, actually. Yeah, she came round to my place. We still had a money issue. They were still holding on to all our royalties. We were skint, but we had this build-up of royalties that they were holding on to, which they said was because of us leaving and the cost of the tour and the gigs they had to cancel, which that wasn't also true either, because she had hepatitis B. She was going to have to take 2 weeks off anyway. We weren't even told. I just thought she had a bad cough. She got hepatitis B because a fan had gobbed down her throat.
Yeah.
So anyway, round she comes. The money thing and the publishing was not mentioned. We never got that money back until 1984. But between Sue and the night time when she came, it wasn't the time or place to be talking about the money. We just, like you said, sort of basically had a hug, got on swell, buried the hatchet. That was that. Last time I saw Siouxsie was when the Creatures played in 1999 in Temple Bar. Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were still like sort of pals.
Every time. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, terrific.
So we actually have sadly run out of time. I mean, obviously there's a lot of stories here, but they're going to be in the book, and the book hopefully will be out next year or the year after. You're working on it now.
Yes, nearly finished.
And also you're living in Ireland, and you're doing loads of painting as well, which is your original love anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
So great paintings as well.
Yeah, it's another serious form of expression, isn't it? Another voice. It's like your clothes is a voice. You're speaking with what you wear. It's a whole statement. It's another way of conversing. Some of my paintings are really like stories. You know, they're not paintings obviously of like bowls of fruit or landscapes. I'm not. Same when I did photography. You know, it would always be of a person. Often people I didn't know, and I used to like taking pictures of people unaware or slightly unaware, not posed, and then so yes, I made films as well, and let me see. So I made a film which got premiered at the International Berlin Film Festival in 1986. That took me 5 years to make, and an EP record of the soundtrack was released a year later in 1987. And the film was called La Main Morte, which is French for the dead hand. But it's written in a fairy tale style. And a lot of people thought it was a fairy tale, but it's not. It was actually privy information that John Mackay had shared with a French journalist over a couple of years when we were in the band. So she knew all this, all the reasons for our discontent. And because she was such a brilliant writer, still is, she penned it, took it to a French newspaper. They said, out the door, doesn't make sense, no one understands it. We want to know why they left, what time, what train they took, you know, all this kind of stuff that the other papers were going to do. But she did this beautiful tale that people thought was a fairy tale. So I'm back and forth anyhow. I goes back to a different college in the East End, starts getting to make 16mm film, and I starts going to London, Paris, Brittany, back and forth. Making this film, and I'm thinking, I wonder I have no soundtrack for this film. I don't even know what it's going to be called. But I feel like this camera is leading me to certain places that later on make complete sense on a high level and on a deep sort of level, if you get me. And it just felt really instinctive. And somewhere along the line, I asked Dorothy one day, I said, "Hey, you know that story you wrote?" She said, "Yeah." And I said, "She put it in a drawer somewhere." I said, "Can you just read it to me?" So she sits down, she reads it to me, and within about a minute or so, I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this is what's going to happen. This is going to be the soundtrack to my film. Dorothy, sitting here with a lovely masculine-like voice, is going to be narrating it. I have to go back to London, get a fucking studio somehow, and record this. And also she introduced me to a brilliant classical pianist. So it was very it was completely the opposite. No one expected me to, this was 8 years on, you see, and no one expected me anyway to come out with anything, which was a far, far cry as possible from what we know as punk. But it's a beautiful.
It's a great work. It's really good. But we've run out of time, like life. So thanks to Kenny.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure. Thank you.